Hello people of YouTube, it's Deepak back again in DCS world. Today we're going to take a little look at the very first DCS module, the KA50 Black Shark, also known by its NATO reporting name of Hokum A. Now, like I said, this was the very first module that was ever released for DCS. In fact, this was actually released as a standalone simulation before DCS World even existed. So it's kind of interesting. This is called Black Shark 2. This is the updated version, which was created as the very first DCS World module. And it's oh, this is going to get noisy. Let's close the door. I've got an MI8 starting up next to me. I forgot about that. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting one because it's basically it's a much older module that's since been updated to DCS World standards. Also, the helicopter itself is a very, very interesting helicopter because it's quite unusual for a combat helicopter for a variety of reasons. One being the fact that it has a coaxial rotor, which is very unusual for a combat helicopter, actually fairly unusual for helicopters in general. So it's got two sets of counter-rotating blades, powered by two turboshaft engines. In addition, it has an ejection seat, which, as far as helicopters go, is again rather unusual. There are explosive bolts in the rotors, which cause them to blow clear of the helicopter before the ejection seat is fired, because I'm sure you can imagine the results of not doing so. And then the last thing that makes this helicopter rather unusual is that it's a single-seat combat helicopter. Most modern-day combat helicopters employ a pilot and a gunner, whereas this aircraft has just a pilot, and it has some, well, for the time, somewhat advanced technology to allow a single pilot to operate all of the systems of communication, navigation, piloting, and weapons employment. Now, this aircraft first flew as a prototype in 1982 and didn't enter service until 1995, and shortly thereafter, of course, the Soviet Union ceased to be a thing, and so it wasn't really until 2006 before the helicopter really entered serious production. So anyway, without further ado, let's crack on. Today we're going to do the startup procedure, taxi, takeoff, quick circuit, landing and shutdown for the KA50. So, for starters, let's turn on the batteries. There are two batteries in the KA50, just for redundancy. The inverter comes on automatically. And before we proceed, we're going to turn on the external ground electric power because that gets us started up quicker. I'm going to ask the ground crew for that.
Подключить питание.
Oh, I've not turned on the intercom. What an idiot. Right, okay, let's try that again.
Подключить питание. Принял.
There we go.
Командир, наземное электропитание подключено.
Okay, and flicking these two switches then turns on the ground power. Okay, next we're going to turn on our fuel quantity gauge, make sure that it's showing a reasonable value, and run it through its self-test to make sure it's working correctly, which it is. I'm going to check the engine temperature gauges for low and high, and they look just fine. Turning on the ecran, which is the built-in warning system. It does master caution and other kinds of warnings, and straight away the master caution light comes on. We cancel that. It's complaining about the main gearbox. Well, main gearbox is not turning. Push and hold the master caution, and the ecran itself will enter self-test. And it says ecran ready. Okay. Next, I'm just going to do a very quick check of the voice unit.
Ekran is ready.
And once again, the ekran is ready. Okay, at this stage we're going to turn on the INU and the INU heater. The INU is the inertial navigation unit. That's the primary navigation system in this helicopter. And now we're going to set about getting the engine started. So, first, turn on the fire extinguishing system, just in case we need it. Front and aft fuel pumps come on. We open the fuel valve for the APU, and we press the start button to start the APU, and now we monitor the start of the APU using this gauge here. This will display the APU's exhaust temperature. And we get APU OK. Right, so at this stage we're now ready to start an engine. So, turn on the beacon lights, just to warn the ground crew to get out of the way. And we need to ask for permission. So, we need to turn on VHF 2. We need to make sure that we have the frequency for MOSDOC dialed in, which is 137. There we go, after a while I got it. Yep, squelch test, and we need to turn our mic selector back to the normal radio.
Ассистент, 103. Запуск.
103. Ассистент. К запуску разрешаю. Ветер у земли 291. Скорость 2 метра в секунду.
Okay, we're cleared for startup. So, we open the fuel shutoff valve for the left engine. We turn on the engine exhaust gas regulator for the left engine. We turn off the rotor brake. We change the selector switch to the left engine, and we press start. At this stage, the APU will use bleed air to spin the turbine up, and I'm going to wait for the number 1 turbine gauge to reach around about 20%. And then I'm going to open the fuel shutoff valve. And we should get spinning rotors, increasing engine 1 RPM, and increasing rotor RPM. And that means that we have a successful start on engine 1. We'll just wait for it to stabilise, which it should do at around about 70% RPM, about here. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm actually going to turn on the HUD, because that takes a little bit of time to warm up, and I'm going to turn on the ABRIS, which also takes a bit of time to boot. As we're on ground power, we can quite happily do that. Okay, engine 1 is started, and now we just repeat the procedure for the right engine. Shut-off valve open, exhaust gas governor on, starter switch to the right position, press start, wait to achieve around about 20% RPM, and again open the cut-off valve. We should get light. Yep, we've got exhaust temperature, we've got RPM climbing, obviously the rotors were already turning, and we should see after a few moments the rotor RPM continue to rise a little bit. We actually still have the throttle setting at idle just now, so it won't reach its operating range, which is up here between these two red marks. Okay, and that is both engines started. Now I personally like to flick the switch out of the position for either of the engines, just in case I do something bad by accident, and we hit APU shutdown to shut down the APU. We no longer need that now that the engine is started, and we can close the shut-off valve for the APU and recover the shut-off valves for the left and right engines. Okay, at this stage we want to throttle them up. Throttles are now at the automatic position, engine RPM will increase, rotor will reach the normal range, and we can now turn on the generators. Now that we have the generators turned on, we want to turn off external power.
Отключить питание.
Принял.
Now we should see these two green lights go out once the external power is disconnected, and we can now turn the external power switches off, and we are now completely on internal power. So now we go through the startup of all of the electronic equipment on board. So first one is we flick this switch to turn on the cheval, which is the targeting system, and put the laser into standby. We're now going to turn on the INU by turning this to operate, and I'm just going to leave this in self-coordinates mode. Data link on. We're going to select commander mode on the data link. We're going to turn on 3 of the autopilot channels. We're going to set the altitude mode to radio altitude. We're going to set cheval scan to 1 degree per second. We're going to set our ADF to channel 5, which is for MOSDoc. Oh, it's not actually turned on. We need to make sure we turn on these power switches for the radios. Right, let's try testing it again. And there we go. Switch it back to compass mode. Okay, we're going to turn on the power for the ejection seat systems, 1, 2 and 3. We're going to turn on the power for the weapons computer, turn on the IFF, turn on the standby instruments, and we're then going to turn on the signal flares, just in case. We're going to turn on the UV26, which is the countermeasures dispenser, and the laser warning system. Then we're going to go to the overhead and turn on both pitot heaters. We're going to set our nav lights to 100%. We're going to set our formation lights to 100%. And we're going to turn on the blade tip lights. And I'm going to turn on my internal lighting, just so I can see what I'm doing with all my instruments. Okay, and at this stage we have completed power up. I'm just going to set my Abris to the moving map mode. Okay. So I'm now going to request a taxi, so I need to switch my selector back to the radio.
Ассистент, 103, руление.
And I'm going to turn on my taxi light.
103. Ассистент. Разрешаю руление на полосу 8.
Okay, taxi runway 8, says the man. Right, I'm going to release brakes. And because this helicopter actually has wheels, we're going to taxi just like an old school aircraft behind this chappie. We just use a little bit of collective and a bit of forward stick just to keep it taxiing. Now, what you're probably going to notice once I take off is that this helicopter is far more stable than the Huey I've been flying previously. This helicopter has not only an autopilot, but it has a stability augmentation system. So, along with the usual helicopter trim, which is the push and hold style, this helicopter also has a system whereby after you've trimmed, it will try to maintain your direction of travel, which is quite useful. I'm just going to stop here for a moment, just so I don't get too close to this guy's tail rotor. And we're off again. I think we have enough clearance now to continue. Okay, now I'm not going to use the whole runway, so I'm going to join halfway, just here.